The corset was too tight, the ballroom too warm, and Willa Northway's vision began to blur at the edges as 300 masked strangers swirled around her in a dizzying waltz of silk and shadow. She'd been invited to the Serpentine Gala by her college roommate Margot, who'd sworn it would be the social event of the season, a mysterious masquerade held in a renovated Gothic mansion on the outskirts of the city, attended by the kind of people who didn't need to advertise their wealth or power. Willa had borrowed the emerald gown from a vintage shop, cinched herself into the boned corset despite her better judgment, and painted her lips crimson just to feel like she belonged among the elite crowd. But now, as the chandeliers overhead seemed to multiply and the classical music swelled to a crescendo that pounded in her ears, she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. The room tilted. Her gloved hand reached for the nearest pillar but found only air. The floor rushed up to meet her, and in that suspended moment before impact, Willa felt a strange sense of acceptance. She was going to faint in front of hundreds of strangers and probably break her nose in the process. Then ice-cold hands caught her waist, and the world stopped spinning. Strong arms pulled her upright, supporting her weight as if she were made of nothing but air and lace. Willa gasped, her lungs finally expanding, as whoever held her loosened the pressure on her ribcage somehow, shifting her position so she could breathe. The scent of winter and old parchment flooded her senses, incongruous in the summer heat of the ballroom. Breathe slowly, a voice commanded near her ear, low and accented with something ancient that didn't belong to any modern country. You're safe. Willa's vision cleared gradually, and she found herself staring up into a face that stole what little breath she'd recovered. The man who held her was ethereally beautiful in a way that seemed almost inhuman. Sharp cheekbones, a patrician nose, lips that were pale but perfectly formed. But it was his coloring that truly arrested her attention. Skin like fresh snow, hair that fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, and eyes that gleamed like polished silver in the chandelier light. He wore black formal attire that looked genuinely antique rather than vintage, with a high collar and silver embroidery that probably cost more than her tuition. His mask was minimalist, just enough black silks to satisfy the dress code while obscuring nothing of his striking features. I thank you, Willa managed, acutely aware that he was still holding her, that the entire ballroom had noticed their collision, that whispers were spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Can you stand? He asked, though he made no move to release her. Yes, I think so. She tested her weight on her feet, relieved when her knees held. The corset, it's too tight, I couldn't breathe. Something flickered in those silver eyes, concern, anger, something she couldn't name. Then remove it. Willa laughed, a breathless sound. I'm not exactly going to undress in the middle of a ballroom. No, he agreed, his tone brooking no argument. You're not. You're going to come with me. Before she could protest, he swept her toward the edge of the room, his hand firmly at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd that parted before them like the Red Sea. Willa caught glimpses of shocked faces behind jeweled masks, heard the whispers growing louder, but the man beside her seemed utterly unconcerned with the attention. He led her through a doorway concealed behind heavy velvet curtains, down a corridor lit by actual flaming torches in wall sconces, and into a private sitting room furnished with antiques that belonged in a museum. The moment he closed the door, the sounds of the ballroom faded to a distant murmur. Turn around, he instructed. Excuse me, turn around. I'm going to loosen your corset before you lose consciousness again. He said it matter-of-factly, as if this were a perfectly normal situation. Unless you'd prefer to suffer for the sake of modesty. Willa hesitated, then turned her back to him. She had to admit, the alternative was returning to that suffocating ballroom and probably fainting again within minutes. At least this stranger had caught her once, and despite the presumptuous way he'd commandeered her, something about his presence felt oddly safe. His fingers found the concealed zipper of her gown with practiced ease, drawing it down just far enough to expose the corset laces beneath. Willa shivered as cool air touched her skin, then shivered again as his hands began working at the knots. What's your name? She asked, needing to fill the intimate silence. Fenrir Nemeth, he replied, loosening the laces with careful precision. And you are Willa Northway, 23 years old, graduate student in art history at the university, currently writing your thesis on Gothic Revival architecture in 19th century Europe. Willa spun around, clutching her loosened dress to her chest. How do you know that? Fenrir regarded her with those unsettling silver eyes, a hint of something that might have been amusement playing at his pale lips. I make it my business to know everyone who enters my home. Your home? This is your house? My estate, yes. I am the host of this evening's gala. He gestured to a nearby chair. Sit, you're still unsteady. Willa sank into the offered seat, her mind reeling. The Serpentine Gala was legendary invitation only, hosted by an anonymous benefactor who supposedly funded half the city's art programs and historical preservation projects. Margot had gotten their invitations through her boss, who'd received them with strict instructions not to inquire about their origin. "Why would you memorize details about hundreds of guests?" Willa asked. "Not hundreds, only the ones who interest me." Fenrir moved to a side table and poured something dark red into a crystal glass. "And you, Willa Northway, are very interesting." "I'm really not. I'm the boring friend who'd rather spend Friday night in the library than at parties." "Then why are you here?" My roommate insisted. "She said I needed to socialize more, meet people, stop hiding behind my research." Willa watched as he took a sip from the glass, noting absently that he didn't offer her any. "I should probably get back. She'll be worried." "Your roommate left with a man in a blue mask approximately 20 minutes ago," Fenrir said. "I saw them depart." "Oh!" Willa shouldn't have been surprised Margot had a talent for collecting admirers. "Well, I should still go. I can call a car." "You could, or you could stay and talk with me." Fenrir settled into the chair opposite hers, studying her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and captivated. "Tell me about your thesis. What fascinates you about Gothic architecture?" Something in his genuine interest, in the intelligent focus of his attention, made Willa relax despite the strangeness of the situation. She found herself explaining her research how Gothic revival wasn't just an aesthetic movement but a spiritual one, architects trying to recapture a sense of the divine and the dramatic that they felt modernity had lost. She talked about flying buttresses and pointed arches, about how these buildings were designed to draw the eye and the soul upward toward something greater. Fenrir listened without interruption, occasionally asking questions that proved he knew far more about the subject than any casual enthusiast should. When Willa mentioned her particular focus on Eastern European interpretations of Gothic style, something sparked in his eyes. "Have you studied the Nemeth castle in the Carpathian region?" he asked. "I've seen photographs, but there's very little documentation available. The family is notoriously private." Willa leaned forward, her earlier discomfort forgotten. "Why? Do you know something about it?" "I know everything about it. I grew up there." Fenrir set down his glass. "If you're interested, I could show you the original architectural plans. I have them in my private collection." "You're joking." "I never joke about architecture." His expression remained serious, but there was a warmth in his voice now. "The castle was built in 1547 by my ancestor, incorporating elements from both Western Gothic cathedrals and Byzantine churches. The Great Hall features a vaulted ceiling with intersecting ribbed arches that create a star pattern." Willa finished breathlessly. "I've theorized about the interior structure based on the external dimensions, but no one's been allowed to study it in decades." "You're actually a Nemeth? From that family?" "The last of the bloodline," Fenrir confirmed. "Which is why I take such care with my family's legacy, and why I fund preservation projects throughout the city. Beauty and history deserve protection." They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing from architecture to art to history with an ease Willa had never experienced with anyone else. Fenrir was educated in a way that suggested centuries rather than decades of learning, making references to historical periods as if he'd witnessed them firsthand. When Willa pointed this out, he deflected with practiced skill. "My family keeps extensive records," he said, "and I've always been a voracious student of history." Eventually, Willa realized how late it had grown. Through the sitting room windows, she could see that full darkness had fallen, the mansion's grounds lit by strategically placed lanterns that created pools of golden light in an ocean of shadow. "I really should go," she said reluctantly, standing and adjusting her loosened dress. "Could you help me with the corset again? I need to be at least minimally presentable to get home." Fenrir rose, but instead of moving to help her, he shook his head. "Don't lace it tight again. Your health is more important than appearance." He crossed to an antique wardrobe and withdrew a black silk shawl embroidered with silver thread. "Wear this. It will cover any impropriety." The shawl was exquisite, clearly worth a fortune. "I can't take this." "You're not taking it, you're borrowing it. Which means you'll have to return it to me." Fenrir draped it around her shoulders, his cold fingers brushing her collarbones. "Say you'll come back tomorrow evening. I'll have those architectural plans ready for you to examine." Willa knew she should refuse. There was something otherworldly about Fenrir Nemeth, something that set off warning bells in the rational part of her mind even as the rest of her felt inexplicably drawn to him. But the offer to see those plans, to access research material that could transform her entire thesis, she couldn't turn that down. "Tomorrow evening," she agreed. "What time?" "After sunset. I'll send a car for you at 8. He produced a card from his jacket pocket with her name already written on it in silver ink along with an address. "Don't be late, Willa Northway." The car he arranged for her was a pristine black town car with a driver who called her Miss Northway and knew her address without being told. During the ride home, Willa wrapped Fenrir's shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried to make sense of what had just happened. She'd gone to a party expecting boredom and social anxiety, and instead she'd met the most fascinating man she'd ever encountered, a man who somehow knew details about her life, who hosted elaborate galas in a Gothic mansion, who discussed medieval architecture like he'd watched it being built. When she got back to her apartment, Margot still wasn't home. Willa changed out of her gown carefully, hanging it in her closet before examining the card Fenrir had given her. The address was in the oldest part of the city, in a district of historic buildings that had been converted into expensive private residences. She should have been exhausted, but instead she found herself at her laptop, searching for information about Fenrir Nemeth. What she found was sparse and strange. There were mentions of the Nemeth family dating back centuries, always wealthy, always powerful, always intensely private. But there were no photographs of Fenrir, no social media presence, no interviews or public appearances. Just references to anonymous donations to museums and historical societies, always arranged through intermediaries. The Nemeth castle had its own mythology, she discovered. Local legends claimed it was cursed, that the family who lived there never aged, that travelers who ventured too close to the estate disappeared. Typical folklore, Willa told herself. Every old castle had ghost stories. But as she finally climbed into bed near dawn, she couldn't shake the memory of Fenrir's ice-cold hands, his impossibly pale skin, the way he'd moved through the crowd as if he were something other than human. She fell asleep with his silver eyes haunting her dreams. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation and doubt. Willa tried to focus on her regular thesis work, but her mind kept returning to the previous night, to Fenrir's promises of architectural plans and his unsettling intensity. Margot finally returned around noon, full of stories about the man she'd left with a hedge fund manager, with a yacht and a condo in Miami. But Willa found she had no interest in hearing about it. "What happened to you?" Margot demanded, collapsing onto the sofa with a dramatic sigh. "I looked everywhere for you. After Marcus and I came back from the gardens, I fainted. The corset was too tight." Willa didn't mention Fenrir, though she wasn't sure why. "I left early. God, I told you not to lace it so tight. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Actually, I met someone who might be able to help with my thesis." Willa kept her tone casual. "He invited me to see some historical documents tonight." Margot's eyes lit up with interest. "He? Tell me everything." "There's nothing to tell. It's a professional meeting." "At night?" "Willa, that's called a date." "It's not a date," Willa insisted, though her cheeks warmed. "He's just being helpful." But as 8 o'clock approached and she found herself changing outfits 3 times, trying to look simultaneously scholarly and attractive, she had to admit that it felt like a date. She finally settled on a deep blue dress that was both modest and flattering, paired with low heels and simple jewelry. Fenrir's shawl she folded carefully and placed in her bag. She'd return it tonight and hopefully manage to act like a normal, rational person instead of the flustered mess she'd been the previous evening. The black town car arrived precisely at 8. The same driver from the night before greeted her with a small bow, opening the door and waiting until she was settled before pulling away from the curb. They drove through the city as the last light faded from the sky, heading toward the historic district, where buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries stood shoulder to shoulder, their facades carefully maintained by preservation societies and wealthy owners. The car finally stopped in front of a 4-story townhouse built from gray stone, with Gothic pointed windows and decorative stonework that Willa immediately recognized as authentic rather than reproduction. A small bronze plaque beside the door read Nemeth in elegant script. The driver opened her door. "Mr. Nemeth is expecting you on the 4th floor, Miss Northway." The front door was unlocked. Willa stepped into an entrance hall lit by candles in wall sconces, the flames reflecting off marble floors and dark wood paneling. A grand staircase curved upward, and she climbed it slowly, taking in the artwork that lined the walls, original oil paintings from various centuries, all depicting nocturnal scenes. Moonlit landscapes, darkened city streets, shadowed forests under starlight. By the time she reached the 4th floor, her heart was pounding, though whether from exertion or anticipation she couldn't say. A single door stood open at the end of the hall, warm light spilling out into the corridor. "Willa," Fenrir's voice called, "come in." She entered what appeared to be a private library and study combined. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes in multiple languages. The fourth wall consisted entirely of Gothic-style windows that overlooked the city lights. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with rolled parchments, loose papers, and what appeared to be original architectural drawings weighted down with polished stones. Fenrir stood by one of the windows, silhouetted against the night. He'd abandoned formal wear for simpler attire, black trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were just as pale as the rest of him. Without the crowds and formal setting of the gala, his otherness was even more pronounced. He looked like a figure from a pre-Raphaelite painting, beautiful and untouchable. "You came," he said, turning to face her. "I wasn't certain you would. You have architectural plans from Nemeth Castle," Willa replied, setting down her bag and withdrawing his shawl. "Nothing could have kept me away. Thank you for lending this to me." Fenrir accepted the shawl but immediately draped it over a nearby chair, dismissing it as unimportant. "Come see what I've prepared for you." The plans spread across his desk were extraordinary hand-drawn documents dating back to the 16th century, showing every detail of the castle's construction. Willa found herself leaning over them, tracing the lines with her finger, reading the notations in archaic script that documented the builder's intentions and techniques. "This is incredible," she breathed. "These should be in a museum. Museums are for things that belong to the past. These documents are part of a living history, my history." Fenrir stood close beside her, pointing out specific details. "See here, the integration of the Orthodox cross motif with Western Gothic verticality. My ancestor wanted to bridge two traditions, create something that honored both his heritage and his aspirations." They pored over the plans together, and Fenrir shared stories about the castle that couldn't be found in any book. Which wing had been added after a fire in the 17th century? Which tower had served as both a library and an observatory? Which hall had hosted treaties between warring nobles? He spoke about these events with a peculiar intimacy, as if they were personal memories rather than family legends. Hours passed without Willa noticing. At some point, Fenrir produced a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, pouring for both of them, though she noticed again that he barely touched his own drink. They moved from the desk to a pair of leather chairs by the window, talking about everything from Byzantine architecture to modern preservation challenges. "Why do you do this?" Willa asked eventually, gesturing to the room around them. "The funding, the preservation projects, the gala. You could just enjoy your wealth privately." Fenrir was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city lights. "Because beauty is fleeting," he said finally. "Everything worth preserving is constantly under threat from time, from neglect, from people who don't understand its value. I've seen too many beautiful things lost to care about anything else." There was a weight to his words, a sorrow that suggested personal experience rather than abstract philosophy. Willa wanted to ask what he'd lost, what had hurt him enough to dedicate himself so completely to preservation, but something about his expression warned her not to push. "I understand that," she said instead. "It's why I chose this field. I want to protect the things that matter." Fenrir's gaze shifted to her, and the intensity in those silver eyes made her breath catch. "That's why you're interesting, Willa Northway. In a world of people who only think about the future, you're one of the few who remembers to look back, who understands that the past has value." "The past is all we have to build on," Willa replied. "Without understanding where we've been, how can we know where we're going?" "Precisely." Fenrir stood, moving to one of the bookshelves and withdrawing a slim volume bound in dark leather. "I want to show you something else. This is a journal kept by the original architect of Nemeth Castle, my several times great-grandfather. He documented not just the construction but his philosophy, what he believed architecture could achieve." Willa accepted the journal with reverent hands, opening it carefully to reveal pages covered in faded ink, the script ornate and difficult to read. But as she parsed through the archaic language, she found passages that spoke directly to her own beliefs about Gothic architecture as a spiritual endeavor. "Could I photograph some of these pages?" she asked. "This would be invaluable for my thesis." "You can do better than that. Take the journal." Fenrir waved away her immediate protests. "I have other materials from the same period. This will serve you better than it serves me sitting on a shelf. I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom, and I'm the last of the family, which means I decide what happens to our heirlooms." He pressed the journal back into her hands when she tried to return it. "Please, Willa, let me contribute to your research. Let me help preserve the knowledge my ancestors accumulated." The sincerity in his voice convinced her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take excellent care of it. I know you will. That's why I'm trusting you with it." Fenrir checked an antique pocket watch. "It's nearly midnight. I should arrange for the car to take you home." Willa was surprised to find how late it had gotten. She'd been so absorbed in their conversation and the documents that time had slipped away unnoticed. As Fenrir walked her down to the entrance hall, she found herself reluctant to leave, to return to the ordinary world after spending an evening in this Gothic sanctuary. "Will I see you again?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for the way it sounded. Fenrir's pale lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Do you want to?" "Yes, I mean for the research and the conversation you're—" She struggled for words that wouldn't sound foolish or presumptuous. "You're easy to talk to." "That's not a compliment I receive often. Most people find me unsettling." He said it without self-pity, simply as a statement of fact. "But I find you easy to talk to as well, Willa. Come back tomorrow night. I have more materials I think you'll find useful." "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. You're providing me with the first genuinely engaging company I've had in longer than you can imagine." He opened the front door for her, and the night air rushed in, warm and humid. "Until tomorrow, then." The car was already waiting at the curb. Willa clutched the journal to her chest as she settled into the back seat, watching through the window as Fenrir stood in the doorway of his Gothic townhouse, a pale figure framed in candlelight, until the car turned a corner and he vanished from view. That night she dreamed of stone castles and silver eyes, of hands as cold as winter catching her before she fell. The pattern continued for the next week. Every evening after sunset, the black car would arrive to take Willa to Fenrir's townhouse, where they'd spend hours discussing history and architecture, examining documents from his extensive collection, talking about everything from medieval construction techniques to modern artistic movements. Fenrir was the most educated person Willa had ever met, with knowledge that spanned centuries and continents, and yet he never made her feel inferior or ignorant. Instead, he listened to her theories and interpretations with genuine interest, often building on her ideas with insights of his own. But as the week progressed, Willa began noticing things that didn't quite add up. Fenrir never ate or drank in her presence beyond the occasional sip of dark red wine. He never appeared before sunset and always seemed eager for her to leave before dawn. His skin remained uniformly pale no matter how much time they spent near the windows, never showing the slightest hint of color or warmth. And his knowledge of historical events was too specific, too personal, as if he'd been there to witness them firsthand. On the 8th night, Willa arrived at the townhouse to find Fenrir in an agitated state. He paced the length of his study, his usual composure fractured, one hand running through his white hair repeatedly. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "There are people in the city who don't approve of our association," Fenrir said tersely. "People who think I'm being reckless." "What people? Why would they care who you spend time with?" Fenrir stopped pacing, turning to face her with an expression that was equal parts frustrated and resigned. "Because I'm not supposed to form attachments to humans. Because every connection I make puts people at risk. Because I should have known better than to let myself care about you." The word humans hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Willa's rational mind wanted to reject but her instincts had already accepted. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. Fenrir closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the silver irises seemed to gleam with an inner light. "I think you already know, Willa. You're too intelligent not to have noticed the signs. You're telling me you're not human." "I'm telling you I'm vampire," Fenrir corrected, "of one of the oldest bloodlines in existence. The Nemeth family has ruled the Carpathian territories for over 1,000 years." Willa should have laughed, should have backed away, called him crazy, run for the door, but instead, she found herself thinking about all the small inconsistencies, all the details that finally made sense in light of this revelation. The pale skin that never flushed or tanned, the way he only appeared after dark, his extensive first-hand knowledge of historical periods, the way he sometimes spoke about the past as if he'd lived it personally because he had. "The castle," she said slowly. "You didn't just grow up there. You were alive when it was built, weren't you?" "I was 28 years old in human years when it was completed. I remember the dedication ceremony, the first feast in the Great Hall." Fenrir's voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "I remember everything, Willa. 500 years of memories, of watching the world change, of seeing everyone I ever cared about grow old and die while I remained frozen in time. But that," she struggled with the enormity of it, "that's impossible. And yet, here I stand." He gestured to himself. "Impossible but real, the curse and gift of vampirism, depending on your perspective." Willa sank into one of the leather chairs, her mind racing. Vampires were supposed to be fictional, monsters from stories meant to frighten children. But Fenrir didn't look monstrous. He looked sad, isolated, impossibly lonely despite his wealth and power. "Why tell me now?" she asked. "Because others of my kind have noticed you. They've seen you coming here night after night, have watched me grow attached to a mortal in ways that violate our unspoken rules. Fenrir moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. Vampires don't form real connections with humans. We feed from them, we use them as necessary, but we don't care about them. Caring is dangerous. Caring makes you vulnerable. Are you saying you care about me? I'm saying I've broken centuries of self-imposed isolation for you. I'm saying I wait all day for sunset so I can see you again. I'm saying that when I caught you in that ballroom, something in me recognized something in you, a kindred spirit, someone who understands the value of preservation, of beauty, of the past. He turned back to face her, and his expression was raw with emotion. I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, Willa Northway, which is the most foolish thing I've done in 500 years. The confession hung between them, weighted with impossibility and truth. Willa's heart pounded against her ribs, her breath coming short not from fear, but from the intensity of her own feelings reflected back at her. I should be terrified right now, she said. You just told me you're a vampire, an immortal creature that feeds on blood. Every survival instinct I have should be screaming at me to run. Why aren't they? Because I trust you. Because you've been nothing but kind and respectful and fascinating. Because when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I do anywhere else. Willa stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. Because I think I'm falling in love with you too, which is completely insane given that we've only known each other for a week, and you're apparently an immortal vampire king. Not a king, just very old nobility. Fenrir reached out hesitantly, cupping her face with one cold hand. You should run, Willa. Being near me puts you in danger. From who? Other vampires. From the entire structure of vampire society. We have laws, hierarchies, traditions that have existed for millennia. One of the most fundamental is that humans are food, not equals, not partners, certainly not lovers. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. If the elders learn that I've fallen in love with a mortal, they'll see you as a weakness to exploit. They'll try to use you against me, or eliminate you to teach me a lesson. Willa covered his hand with her own, pressing it more firmly against her face despite the chill of his skin. Then we'll be careful. We'll keep this secret. For how long? Your lifespan is a heartbeat compared to mine. Even if we manage to hide our connection, in 60 or 70 years you'll be gone and I'll still be here, unchanged, immortal, alone again. The pain in his voice was devastating. That's why I don't let myself care about humans. The loss is inevitable. Everything ends, Fenrir. Human relationships end all the time, through death, through distance, through change. That doesn't make them worthless. Willa pulled his hand down from her face but didn't release it, threading her fingers through his. Would you really choose 500 more years of isolation over whatever time we could have together? I've survived this long by not letting anyone matter enough to hurt me when they leave. That's not surviving. That's just existing. She squeezed his hand. I'm not saying this is simple or easy, but I think what we have is worth fighting for. Don't you? Fenrir stared at their joined hands, her warm, olive-toned skin against his pale, cold flesh. Then he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his forehead against hers. You're asking me to be selfish, he murmured, to risk your safety for my happiness. I'm asking you to let yourself be happy for once in 5 centuries. Willa slid her arms around his neck. I can make my own choices about risk, stubborn, brilliant woman. Fenrir's breath was cool against her lips. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the warm, passionate kisses Willa had experienced with human boyfriends. Fenrir's lips were cold, his mouth tasted of darkness and wine, and there was an inhuman grace to the way he held her, as if she were something precious and fragile. But there was also genuine emotion in the kiss, longing and fear and desperate hope all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, Willa was breathless, and Fenrir's silver eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. We need to be careful, he said hoarsely. If other vampires discover how much you mean to me, then we'll deal with it together, Willa finished. You're not alone anymore, Fenrir. Something in him seemed to break at those words, some wall he'd built up over centuries of isolation. He pulled her close again, burying his face in her hair, and Willa held him while he processed emotions he'd probably been suppressing for longer than she'd been alive. Eventually, they moved to the sofa, sitting close together while Fenrir explained the reality of vampire existence. He told her about the blood hunger that never truly faded, the way sunlight would burn his flesh to ash within minutes, the complex hierarchy of vampire courts that governed territories around the world. He explained that he was considered a sovereign, a vampire old and powerful enough to rule his own territory, answering only to the council of elders who oversaw all vampire kind. Do you kill people? Willa asked, needing to know the truth. When you feed, not in over 200 years, Fenrir replied. I learned control, found ethical ways to sustain myself. There are humans who consent to provide blood in exchange for money or protection. I have arrangements with several blood banks. It's not the same as feeding from a living source, but it's enough to survive. Could you feed from me? No. The answer was immediate and sharp. Absolutely not. Why not? I'm offering, because feeding creates an intimacy that's difficult to control. Because the venom in my bite is addictive, can turn humans into thralls who lose their free will. Because I won't risk harming you or enslaving you, even accidentally. Fenrir's grip on her hand tightened. Promise me you'll never offer that again. I promise, Willa agreed, though she didn't fully understand his vehemence. But if you need blood, I'll manage the way I've been managing for centuries. You don't need to worry about my survival. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a cold kiss to her knuckles. I've survived wars, plagues, revolutions, and the fall of empires. I'll survive whatever comes next, as long as I have something worth surviving for. They talked until the sky began to lighten outside the windows, until Fenrir grew visibly anxious about the approaching dawn. He walked Willa down to where the car waited, kissing her one more time before helping her into the back seat. Tomorrow night? She asked. Every night, Fenrir promised, for as long as you'll have me. But when Willa returned the next evening, she found the townhouse dark and locked. The driver who picked her up looked nervous, avoiding her questions with practiced evasion. After circling the block 3 times, he finally admitted that Mr. Nemeth had been summoned to an emergency council meeting and had left instructions that Willa should stay away from his properties until he returned. Did something happen? Willa demanded. Is he in trouble? I don't know the details, miss. I'm just following orders. Willa spent the next 2 days in an agony of worry. She couldn't call Fenrir. He'd explained that vampires considered cell phones too traceable, too vulnerable to surveillance. She couldn't go to the townhouse without an invitation. All she could do was wait and try to focus on her thesis work, which seemed impossibly trivial compared to the fear that something had happened to the vampire she'd fallen in love with. On the 3rd night, a different car arrived at her apartment, a sleek silver vehicle, with tinted windows and a driver she didn't recognize. The woman who emerged from the back seat was strikingly beautiful, with the same pale skin and white hair as Fenrir, her features sharp and aristocratic. She wore a crimson suit that probably cost more than Willa's entire wardrobe. Willa Northway? The woman asked, her accent similar to Fenrir's but somehow colder. I am Serafina Valdis, representative of the Council of Elders. I need you to come with me. Every instinct Willa possessed screamed danger, but she forced herself to stay calm. Where's Fenrir? Is he all right? That depends entirely on you. Serafina's smile was all teeth, sharp and predatory. Come peacefully, answer our questions honestly, and perhaps we can resolve this situation without further complication. And if I refuse? Then Fenrir Nemeth will be executed for violating our most sacred laws, and you'll be eliminated as a security risk. Those are your options, Miss Northway. Choose quickly. Willa got in the car. They drove out of the city, heading into the countryside as full darkness fell. Serafina sat across from Willa in the back seat, studying her with undisguised curiosity. You're not what I expected, the vampire said eventually. When Fenrir claimed he'd found a human worthy of his attention, I imagined someone more. You seem quite ordinary. Sorry to disappoint, Willa replied, refusing to show fear despite her racing heart. Where are we going? To a place where the council can speak with you privately. We have questions about your relationship with the Nemeth sovereign, about what exactly he's told you regarding vampire society. Serafina's red eyes gleamed in the darkness. Understand, Miss Northway, that humans who learn our secrets typically don't survive long enough to share them. Fenrir trusts me. I'm not going to expose vampire existence to the world. Trust is not a concept vampires place much value in. We prefer certainty. The car turned onto a private road leading toward a sprawling estate hidden behind iron gates. You're about to meet some of the oldest, most powerful beings on this planet. I suggest you show appropriate deference. The estate was a Gothic masterpiece, a mansion that looked like it had been transported directly from medieval Europe, complete with towers and battlements and stained glass windows that glowed from within. Serafina led Willa through corridors lined with ancient tapestries and armor, deeper into the heart of the building until they reached a great hall that took Willa's breath away. The vaulted ceiling soared overhead, supported by stone columns carved with intricate designs. Long tables lined both sides of the hall, and at the far end, seated on a raised dais, were 3 figures who radiated such power and age that Willa felt it like physical pressure against her skin, the Council of Elders. They all shared the characteristic white skin and hair of ancient vampires, but their eyes were different colors: gold, crimson, and ice blue. They wore clothing from various historical periods, as if they'd each stopped updating their wardrobe at different points across the centuries. And kneeling before the dais, head bowed, was Fenrir. Willa's heart clenched at the sight of him in such a subservient position. Everything about his posture spoke of forced submission, and when he glanced up at her arrival, his silver eyes were filled with fury and fear in equal measure. "Don't," he said sharply as Willa started toward him. "Stay where you are. The human arrives." The elder with gold eyes observed, his voice like grinding stone. "How interesting. We were just discussing what to do about you, Miss Northway." "Let her go," Fenrir demanded, still kneeling but meeting the elder's gazes with defiance. "She's done nothing wrong. This situation is entirely my fault." "Oh, we agree that you're at fault, Fenrir." The crimson-eyed elder leaned forward. "You've broken our fundamental law. You've fallen in love with a mortal. You've shared our secrets. Risked exposure of our entire society for the sake of human companionship. Such weakness cannot be tolerated." "Then punish me," Fenrir said, "but leave Willa out of this. Except we can't leave her out of it, can we?" The blue-eyed elder spoke for the first time, her voice deceptively gentle. "She knows what we are. She could expose us, could bring hunters and scientists and the entire weight of human curiosity down upon our kind. The only safe option is to eliminate her." "No!" Fenrir surged to his feet and immediately 2 vampire guards materialized from the shadows, forcing him back down. "I'll submit to any punishment, accept any restriction, but you will not harm her." "Such passion," the gold-eyed elder mused. "Tell me, Miss Northway, do you return Fenrir's affections? Or has he simply enchanted you, twisted your mind with vampire influence?" Willa found her voice, though it shook slightly. "He hasn't enchanted me. I care about him because he's brilliant and kind and lonely. Because he understands what I value. Because when I'm with him, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing." "How romantic," Seraphina murmured from behind her. "And how foolish." "Perhaps," the crimson-eyed elder said, "but perhaps also an opportunity. Tell me, human, what do you know about the laws governing vampire society?" "Only what Fenrir's told me, that vampires are supposed to keep themselves separate from humans. That relationships between the species are forbidden. And do you know why such laws exist?" Willa considered carefully before answering. "Because intimacy creates vulnerability. Because caring about mortals means watching them age and die. Because maintaining secrecy is easier when there are no emotional attachments." "Perceptive." The blue-eyed elder nodded approvingly. "Those are all valid reasons, but there's another consideration: power dynamics. Vampires are stronger, faster, immortal. Any relationship with a human is inherently unequal. How can we trust that the human's affection is real rather than coerced, even unintentionally?" "You can't," Willa admitted. "But you can't guarantee perfect equality in any relationship, human or vampire. All you can do is communicate, respect boundaries, and trust each other to be honest about what you want." "She argues well," the gold-eyed elder observed. "But arguments don't change our fundamental problem. We have a sovereign who's violated our laws and a human who knows our secrets. Tradition demands death for both infractions." "Then change your traditions," Willa said desperately. "You've survived for thousands of years by adapting to changing circumstances, haven't you? The world isn't what it was when these laws were created. Maybe it's time to reconsider whether they still serve their purpose." Bold words from someone in no position to negotiate. The crimson-eyed elder stood, descending from the dais with fluid grace. "But you raise an interesting point. Our laws were created to protect vampire society, not to make our people miserable. If Fenrir has truly found something valuable in you—" "He has," Willa interrupted. "And I've found something valuable in him. We're not asking to parade our relationship publicly. We're not going to expose vampire existence. We just want to be together, in private, without fear of execution." The 3 elders exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, the blue-eyed elder spoke. "We propose a compromise. Willa Northway, you will undergo the turning, become a vampire yourself. This solves multiple problems. It equalizes the power dynamic in your relationship, ensures your silence permanently, and removes the inevitability of aging and death that makes mortal vampire relationships so painful." "No," Fenrir said immediately. "Absolutely not. The turning is agonizing, and there's no guarantee she'll survive it. I won't risk her life, and I won't condemn both of you to death," the elder countered. "Those are your options, Fenrir. Either she turns and joins our society as your equal, or we execute both of you for violating our laws. Choose." Willa's mind raced, becoming a vampire, giving up her humanity, her mortality, everything she'd known. But the alternative was death for both her and Fenrir. And hadn't she already accepted that their relationship would require extraordinary measures? "What does the turning involve?" she asked. Willa no. Fenrir tried to reach her, but the guards held him back. Don't do this. Don't sacrifice your humanity for me. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing a future where we can be together. She turned back to the elders. Tell me what I need to know. The blue-eyed elder smiled, and it was genuinely warm. It requires drinking vampire blood, ancient blood, from one of us. The process takes 3 days, during which your human body will die and be reborn. You'll experience fever, hallucinations, and pain as your cells transform. Not everyone survives. But if you do, you'll emerge as one of us, immortal, powerful, and bound by our laws forever. And Fenrir and I would be free to be together? Once you've completed your turning and demonstrated control over your new abilities, yes, you would be recognized as Fenrir's mate, with all the rights and protections that entails. The elder extended one pale hand. Do you accept these terms? Willa looked at Fenrir, saw the fear and love warring in his expression. She thought about her life as a human, her thesis, her career plans, her family and friends. She'd be giving up everything familiar, stepping into a world of darkness and blood and immortality. But she'd also be gaining something extraordinary. A love that could last centuries, a partner who understood her passions, the chance to preserve history not just through research but by living through it. I accept, she said, placing her hand in the elder's cold grasp. The turning began immediately. The blue-eyed elder who introduced herself as Katarina led Willa to a private chamber deep within the estate, a windowless room furnished with a single bed and supplied with water and towels. Fenrir was allowed to accompany them, though Katarina made clear he couldn't interfere with the process. The blood must be freely given and freely taken, Katarina explained, using a small knife to open a vein in her wrist. Dark red blood, almost black, welled up from the cut. Drink deeply, Willa Northway. Drink and be reborn. The taste was indescribable, copper and iron, and something ancient that seemed to carry centuries of memory and power. Willa forced herself to swallow, to keep drinking even as her stomach rebelled, until Katarina pulled her wrist away and the wound sealed itself instantly. Now we wait, Katarina said. Fenrir, you may stay with her, but do not give her your own blood no matter how much she begs. The transformation must run its course with only elder blood in her system. The elder departed, leaving Fenrir and Willa alone. For a few minutes nothing happened. Then the fever began. It started as a warmth in her stomach that spread rapidly through her entire body, becoming a burning heat that made her skin feel like it was on fire. Willa gasped, collapsing onto the bed as her muscles seized. I'm here, Fenrir said, kneeling beside her and taking her hand. I'm not leaving. Just hold on, Willa, hold on. The next 3 days were a blur of agony and delirium. Willa's body temperature spiked so high she should have died, then plummeted until she shivered uncontrollably. Her senses went haywire, sounds became deafening, lights unbearably bright even in the dim chamber. She hallucinated conversations with people long dead, witnessed historical events she'd only read about, experienced memories that weren't her own. Through it all, Fenrir stayed beside her. He cooled her with damp cloths when the fever spiked, wrapped her in blankets when the chills took over, held her hand while she screamed and thrashed and begged for it to stop. He told her stories about his centuries of existence, about places he'd seen and people he'd known, keeping his voice steady and constant as an anchor to reality. On the 3rd day, something shifted. The pain began to recede, replaced by a strange clarity. Willa's senses sharpened further, but this time in ways she could control. She could hear Fenrir's heartbeat, realized with shock that he actually had a heartbeat, slow and steady like a drum. She could smell the different minerals in the stone walls, distinguish between various types of metal in the chamber's few furnishings. And when she opened her eyes, the darkness no longer seemed dark. She could see every detail of Fenrir's face, notice the way his pupils dilated slightly when he realized she was awake, count the individual threads in his shirt. Willa? His voice was hoarse from days of constant talking. How do you feel? She sat up carefully, testing her new body. Everything felt different, lighter, stronger, more alive despite technically being undead. Her skin had paled to match Fenrir's, though not quite as dramatically. When she caught her reflection in the metal tray that held the water pitcher, she saw that her brown eyes had lightened to amber gold. I feel incredible, she said, and her voice sounded different, too clearer, with an undertone that reminded her of Fenrir's accent. Is it supposed to feel this good? The initial transformation often comes with euphoria. It will settle into something more manageable. Fenrir cupped her face, studying her with wonder and relief. You survived. You actually survived. Do you have any idea how rare that is? No, but I'm guessing rare enough that you were terrified I wouldn't make it. I've never been so frightened in 500 years. He pulled her close, holding her tightly. Don't ever scare me like that again. Willa returned the embrace, noticing that his skin no longer felt cold against hers, or rather that her skin was now the same temperature as his. They were matched now, equal in ways that transcended species. Katerina returned that evening to assess Willa's transformation. She conducted various tests checking reflexes, testing strength, evaluating control. Willa discovered she could hear heartbeats from several rooms away, move faster than human eyes could track, and crush a metal goblet with casual pressure. "Excellent," Katerina pronounced finally. "You've turned cleanly with no complications. Your abilities will continue developing over the next few months, but you have all the fundamentals. The council recognizes your transformation as legitimate. So we're free to go?" Fenrir asked, his arm wrapped protectively around Willa's waist. "Free to leave the estate, yes. But you're not free of responsibility, Fenrir. You now have a fledgling mate to teach and guide. She must learn our laws, our customs, our methods of survival. Any mistakes she makes will reflect on you." Katerina's expression softened slightly. "But I believe you'll both do well. You've already proven your commitment to each other." The council granted them formal permission to live together as mates, with the understanding that Willa would complete her education in vampire society, and Fenrir would be held accountable for her actions. They returned to the city as dawn approached, racing the sunrise to reach the safety of Fenrir's townhouse. In the light-proof sanctuary of his bedroom, Fenrir finally allowed himself to relax, pulling Willa onto the massive four-poster bed and holding her as if she might disappear. "I thought I'd lost you," he admitted quietly. "When you were going through the turning, there were moments when your heart stopped, when I thought." His voice broke. "But I'm here," Willa assured him, kissing his forehead, his cheeks, his lips. "We're both here and we have forever now. Literally forever. Forever is a long time. Are you sure you won't regret giving up your human life?" "I'm sure I'd regret losing you more." She settled against him, marveling at how right it felt to be in his arms, how perfectly they fit together now. "Besides, think of all the historical research I can do now. I can interview vampires who actually lived through the periods I'm studying. I can spend centuries analyzing architecture and art movements. This is a history student's dream." Fenrir laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Only you would see immortality as an academic opportunity." "Well, I didn't become a vampire for the blood-drinking and nocturnal lifestyle. I did it for you." Willa traced patterns on his chest. "Speaking of which, when do I need to learn to feed?" "Soon, but not today. Today you rest, let your body finish adjusting. Tomorrow night I'll teach you proper feeding technique using donated blood. Eventually you'll learn to hunt ethically, but there's no rush." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "We have all the time in the world." They spent the daylight hours talking and touching, learning each other in new ways now that they were matched. Fenrir explained more about vampire society, the territorial boundaries, the political alliances, the centuries-old feuds that still influenced modern vampire interactions. Willa asked questions about everything from feeding logistics to vampire reproduction to whether she'd still be able to eat regular food. Yes, but it wouldn't provide nourishment. As the sun set on her first full day as a vampire, Willa stood at the Gothic windows of Fenrir's study, watching the city lights flicker to life below. "What are you thinking?" Fenrir asked, joining her at the window. "That I should probably call my family, let them know I'm all right. They'll be worried about me disappearing for days." Willa leaned against him. "What do I tell them? That you've met someone, that you're taking some time to travel, that you'll visit when you can." Fenrir wrapped his arms around her from behind. "The hardest part of immortality is watching mortals age while you stay the same. Eventually you'll need to distance yourself from your human connections, let them believe you've moved away or lost touch. It's kinder than letting them watch you remain 23 forever." The thought brought a pang of sadness, but Willa pushed it aside. She'd known there would be costs to this choice. "I'll handle it. I just need some time to figure it out, the right approach." "We'll figure it out together," Fenrir corrected. "You're not alone in this, Willa. Whatever challenges come, we face them as partners. Partners, mates forever." The words should have been terrifying in their permanence, but instead they filled Willa with a sense of rightness, of having found exactly where she belonged. Over the following weeks, Willa adapted to her new existence with surprising ease. Fenrir taught her to feed from donated blood supplies, showed her how to move through the city unseen, introduced her to other vampires in his territory who grudgingly accepted her as his mate. She continued working on her thesis, now with access to vampire informants who could provide first-hand accounts of the historical periods she studied. The hardest part was managing her relationships with humans. She called her parents and friends, making excuses about a research opportunity abroad, promising to stay in touch. Margot was hurt that Willa had moved away so suddenly, but eventually accepted the explanation that she'd received a fellowship to study in Europe. "Will it ever get easier?" Willa asked Fenrir one night after a particularly difficult phone call with her mother. Lying to people I love? No, he admitted. But the pain fades to a manageable ache, and eventually they'll pass on, and you'll be left with memories instead of active grief. He pulled her close. I'm sorry. I wish I could spare you that. It's not your fault. It's just the reality of what we are. Willa kissed him softly. But I have you, and that makes everything else bearable. Their relationship deepened as the months passed. Fenrir showed Willa his world's secret vampire gatherings in underground clubs, midnight visits to museums where they had the galleries to themselves, trips to historical sites that took on new meaning now that she could appreciate them through immortal eyes. In turn, Willa brought enthusiasm and fresh perspective to Fenrir's centuries-old routines, reminding him to appreciate the world's beauty rather than simply existing through it. 6 months after her turning, the council summoned them again. Willa's heart raced as they made the journey to the Gothic estate, worried that some new complication had arisen. But when they were ushered into the great hall, the 3 elders actually looked pleased. Willa Northway, Katarina said formally. You have completed your transition successfully, demonstrated control and discretion, and proven yourself worthy of your place in vampire society. The council recognizes you as a full member of the Nemeth territory, with all rights and privileges thereof. Thank you, Willa replied, bowing her head respectfully. I'm honored. More importantly, the gold-eyed elder added, you've shown us that perhaps our old prejudices against human-vampire relationships were overly restrictive. Your partnership with Fenrir has strengthened rather than weakened him. You've brought new perspective to our community. We are considering revising our laws to allow for such unions in the future under carefully controlled circumstances. Fenrir stiffened beside Willa in surprise. You're saying other vampires could seek human mates without fear of execution? We're saying we'll consider it, the crimson-eyed elder corrected. You two will serve as the test case. If your relationship continues to thrive without causing problems for vampire society, we may allow others the same opportunity. It was more than Willa had dared hope for, not just acceptance for herself and Fenrir, but the possibility of changing vampire society for the better, of giving other vampires the chance to find the kind of connection they'd found. We won't disappoint you, she promised. See that you don't. But Katarina's expression was warm. Now go, live your immortal life together. Return in a decade and tell us how it's going. They returned to the city as the first snow of winter began to fall, watching white flakes drift past the car windows. Back at the townhouse, Fenrir built a fire in the study's massive hearth purely for ambiance, since neither of them felt cold anymore, and they settled onto the sofa together. A decade seems like such a long time, Willa mused. But I suppose it's not in vampire terms. It's barely a blink, Fenrir agreed. But we'll make the most of every moment. I'll teach you everything I know about architecture and history. We'll travel to every significant Gothic structure in the world. We'll build a life together that honors both where we've been and where we're going. That sounds perfect. Willa turned in his arms, studying the face she'd grown to love so deeply. Do you ever regret it? Falling in love with me, upending your comfortable isolation? Every day, Fenrir said seriously, then broke into a rare, genuine smile at her shocked expression. Every day I wake at sunset and think about how much easier my existence was before you swooned in that ballroom. How much simpler everything was when I didn't care about anyone. That's not funny. And then I see you, he continued, cupping her face in his hands. And I remember that easy and simple aren't the same as worthwhile. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever: hope, purpose, a reason to look forward to the next century instead of simply enduring it. So no, Willa Northway, I don't regret falling in love with you. I regret only that I didn't let myself love sooner. Willa kissed him then, pouring 500 years of his loneliness and 23 years of her searching into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. Tell me about the castle again, Willa requested, settling against his chest. About the great hall with the star ceiling and the library tower with windows facing east to catch the dawn before the sun became dangerous to you. And Fenrir told her, his voice weaving stories of stone and memory, of a life that had once seemed endless and empty but now felt full of possibility. Outside, snow continued to fall on the sleeping city, blanketing the modern world in white silence. Inside, 2 immortal beings held each other close and planned their forever. Years passed like water, each one bringing new experiences and deeper connection. Willa completed her thesis with Fenrir's help, though she never published it. The knowledge it contained, drawn from vampire sources, was too revealing. Instead, she began working with Fenrir on his preservation projects, using her academic training and his financial resources to save historic buildings from demolition and neglect. They traveled extensively, visiting the Nemeth castle in the Carpathians, where Fenrir showed her the halls he'd walked as a young man. They explored Gothic cathedrals across Europe, attended vampire courts in various territories, and slowly built a network of friends and allies who accepted their unusual partnership. The hardest moment came 15 years after Willa's turning, when her mother passed away. Willa had maintained limited contact over the years, always making excuses about research keeping her abroad, never visiting in person lest her unchanging appearance raise questions. But when the call came that her mother had died peacefully in her sleep, the grief was overwhelming. Fenrir held her through days of weeping, let her rage at the unfairness of immortality that meant outliving everyone she'd once known, and eventually helped her find peace with the loss. She had a good life, Willa said finally, standing at the window of Fenrir's study where she'd stood so many times before. She was happy, and I got to know her, even if I couldn't be completely honest about my life. That's more than nothing. It's never enough, Fenrir replied, joining her. But it's what we have, and we honor them by living well, by making our extended lives meaningful. Is that what you've done? Made your life meaningful? Not until you entered it. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. You gave me a reason to engage with the world again instead of just preserving it from a distance. You reminded me that beauty isn't just something to protect, it's something to experience and share. Willa turned in his arms, studying the face she knew better than her own now. 20 years together, and she still found new depths in him, new reasons to love him. What do you think our lives will look like in another century? She asked. Will we still be here in this townhouse, still working on preservation projects? I think we'll be wherever we need to be, doing whatever matters to us at the time. Fenrir kissed her forehead. The beauty of immortality is that we don't have to decide our entire future right now. We can adapt, change, grow. As long as we're together, the details don't matter. They celebrated their 20th anniversary not of Willa's turning, but of the night she'd swooned in the ballroom and Fenrir had caught her with a private party in the Gothic mansion where they'd first met. The Serpentine Gala had become an annual tradition, still held each year and still mysterious to human guests. But now Willa and Fenrir attended as hosts, welcoming both humans and vampires to an event that celebrated beauty and mystery without requiring anyone to hide their true nature completely. Do you remember what you were thinking when you caught me? Willa asked, dancing with Fenrir in the same ballroom where they'd first touched. I remember thinking you were going to crack your skull open on the marble floor if I didn't move fast, Fenrir replied, spinning her gracefully. And then I looked at your face and thought you were the most interesting thing I'd seen in decades. I could see intelligence in your eyes, determination, a kind of fierce passion for life that I'd forgotten was possible. I thought you were going to drop me. You looked so shocked. I was shocked. In 500 years, I'd never felt the kind of immediate connection I felt with you. It was like recognizing something I didn't even know I'd been missing. He pulled her closer as the music swelled. Some people don't believe in love at first sight. But I think what we felt was recognition, souls identifying each other across the species barrier. Ari, that's very romantic for someone who claimed not to believe in romance. You've made me believe in many things I thought were lost to me. Romance, hope, joy. Fenrir dipped her dramatically, earning applause from nearby dancers. A future worth living instead of just enduring. When the gala ended and the last guest departed, Willa and Fenrir walked through the empty ballroom hand in hand, appreciating the space that had brought them together. The chandeliers still glittered overhead, the marble floors still gleamed, but now the room held 2 decades of memories layered over that first dramatic meeting. Thank you, Willa said suddenly, for catching me that night, for taking a chance on an ordinary human with a too tight corset and a passion for old buildings. You were never ordinary, Fenrir corrected, and you took just as much of a chance on me, a vampire who'd isolated himself for centuries, who didn't know how to connect with anyone anymore. You taught me how to live again, Willa. How to love, how to believe that forever didn't have to be lonely. They stood in the center of the ballroom where Willa had nearly fainted 2 decades earlier and kissed in the space where their lives had intertwined. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, humans and vampires coexisting in secret balance. But in that moment, none of it mattered except the two of them, 2 immortal beings who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. Forever is a long time, Willa murmured against Fenrir's lips. Yes, he agreed. But with you, forever doesn't seem long enough. And so they began their next century together, 2 souls bound by love that transcended species and time, proving that even in a world of darkness and blood and ancient laws, genuine connection could still bloom. They preserved history while making their own, protected beauty while creating it, and loved each other with the kind of devotion that ballads were written about, though their story would never be told in full, existing only in the private moments between a vampire king and the woman who'd swooned into his arms and stolen his frozen heart. The world continued turning, seasons cycling through their eternal dance, and Willa and Fenrir moved through it all together. They faced challenges, territorial disputes with other vampire courts, moments of doubt about their choices, the occasional threat from vampire hunters who'd discovered whispers of their unusual relationship. But each obstacle only strengthened their bond, proved that what they'd built was worth fighting to protect. 50 years after that fateful night in the ballroom, the council summoned them once more. Katarina had been replaced by a new elder, but the other two remained, ancient and powerful and curious about how the experimental relationship had evolved. Half a century together, the gold-eyed elder observed. Still devoted to each other? More than ever, Willa replied confidently. We've built a life that honors both our natures, my human origins, and our shared immortality. We've contributed to vampire society while maintaining connections to the human world through our preservation work. We've proven that cross-species relationships can work if both parties are committed. Indeed you have. The crimson-eyed elder actually looked pleased. Your success has inspired us to modify our laws. Vampires may now seek human mates with council approval, provided they follow the protocols you two established. The turning must be the human's choice, undertaken with full knowledge of consequences, and the vampire must demonstrate genuine commitment rather than mere infatuation. Fenrir's hand tightened on Willa's. You're saying we've changed vampire law? You've reminded us that our laws should serve our well-being, not simply enforce tradition for its own sake. Several vampires have already petitioned to pursue human mates, and we've granted permission in cases where the relationship seems genuine. The elder leaned forward. You've given our kind something we'd forgotten was possible, the chance for real connection across the boundaries we'd drawn. That's no small accomplishment. They left the council meeting with a sense of profound satisfaction. Not only had their love survived and thrived, but it had created positive change for others. They'd opened doors that had been closed for millennia, proven that rigid separation between species wasn't the only way to maintain vampire society's security. We made a difference, Willa said wonderingly as they drove back to the city through the pre-dawn darkness. Not just for us, but for others like us. You made the difference, Fenrir corrected. I would have accepted execution rather than risk you going through the turning. You're the one who had the courage to choose transformation, to fight for us when I was ready to give up. We both fought. We both chose this. Willa laced her fingers through his, and I'd choose it again every single time. They returned to the townhouse as the first hints of dawn colored the eastern sky, racing inside moments before the deadly sunlight could touch them. In the safety of Fenrir's bedroom, they lay together in the darkness, listening to each other's slow heartbeats, savoring the perfect contentment of being exactly where they belonged. Tell me something, Willa said after a long, comfortable silence. In all your centuries of existence, did you ever imagine you'd end up here, mated to a former human, changing vampire laws, happy? Fenrir was quiet for a moment, considering. No, he admitted finally. I'd resigned myself to eternal isolation. I thought vampires like me were too old, too set in our ways, too damaged by centuries of loss to ever connect with anyone again. I thought love was something I'd experienced and lost in my human life, never to be recovered. What changed? You swooned in a ballroom and I caught you, and for the first time in 500 years I held someone and didn't want to let go. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. You changed everything, Willa. You took my cold, isolated existence and filled it with warmth and purpose and joy. You made me believe in possibilities I'd thought were lost forever. Willa blinked back, tears, vampire tears that she'd learned to cry over the decades. You saved me too, you know. Not just physically catching me when I fell, but emotionally. I was so focused on the past, on dead history and forgotten beauty, that I was barely living in the present. You taught me that preservation isn't just about protecting what was, it's about creating meaning for what will be. They held each other as the sun rose outside, safe in their light-proof sanctuary, planning the decades and centuries still ahead of them. There would be challenges, certainly immortality guaranteed that. There would be losses, changes, moments of doubt and fear. But there would also be love, partnership, and the profound satisfaction of facing eternity together rather than alone. I love you, Fenrir said simply. For 50 years I've loved you. For the next 1,000 years I'll love you. For whatever forever we have, I'll love you. I love you too, Willa replied. My vampire king who caught me when I fell and never let me go. Never, Fenrir promised. Not for all eternity. And so their story continued. Not an ending but an eternal beginning, two souls bound across species and centuries, proving that even in a world of darkness, love could be the brightest light. They'd found each other against impossible odds, fought for their right to exist together, and built a life that honored both their pasts and their infinite future. The ballroom where they'd met stood empty now, waiting for next year's gala, but the memory of that moment lived forever in two immortal hearts. Willa had swooned from a tight corset in a crowded ballroom, and the vampire king had caught her, and in that instant of connection both their lives had changed irrevocably, beautifully, eternally. They'd faced down ancient councils, transformed human to vampire, challenged laws older than nations, and emerged victorious, not just surviving but thriving. Their love story would never be widely known, existing only in whispered legends among vampire circles and the private moments they shared. But it was real, it was powerful, and it was forever. As dawn fully broke and they drifted into the day sleep that all vampires required, Willa's last conscious thought was one of perfect gratitude. She'd come to a masquerade expecting nothing more than a boring evening of small talk and social anxiety. Instead, she'd found her soulmate, her partner, her eternal love, all because she'd laced her corset too tight and fainted into the arms of a lonely vampire king who'd been waiting 500 years for someone exactly like her. Sometimes fate worked in mysterious ways. Sometimes destiny arrived in the form of a too tight corset and a crowded ballroom and a vampire with silver eyes who'd forgotten how to hope. And sometimes, if you were incredibly lucky, that destiny led to forever, a forever filled with love, purpose, and the kind of deep connection that made immortality feel not like a curse but like an extraordinary gift. A gift they would treasure together, now and always, through all the centuries yet to come. Their story was complete, their love secure, their future bright with endless possibility. The vampire king had caught the falling human, and in doing so, had caught something far more precious, a reason to live, to love, to believe in beauty beyond mere preservation. They had forever, and forever had never looked so beautiful.